Welcome back to this week's edition of Impactful Teamwork. I am so excited to have you here, and today more than ever, because today it is our birthday. It is a full year that we have been recording and delivering to you the Impactful Teamwork podcast. And I've got to confess, when I started on this journey of podcasting a year ago, I never expected we would get to this point because, quite frankly, I'm usually not that consistent and I'm quite good at getting out of the gate and get things going. But actually, staying the course is usually a big, big challenge for me. So I am super, super proud that we have got to a full year's anniversary. And it's been really interesting for me, this journey, because every single week I've just felt compelled that I need to record something for you and to connect with you. And sometimes that's meant recording these podcasts at silly times of the day or night if I've been away and I've been traveling. But it's been such a pleasure and it's been so insightful because actually the discipline of having to share some information with you, and I hope you're finding it really, really worthwhile information, challenges and stretches me and takes me out of my comfort zone to find more interesting topics or relevant research that I can share with you each and every week. So before we get into celebration and why celebration is so important, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about consistency because it's not a very flashy topic. Let's just admit that. It doesn't excite the juices, right? It doesn't make us sparkle with any type of innovation. But I think when it comes to creating high performance teams, consistency is one of the most powerful forces that we can harness. And why is that? I think consistency builds trust. And we're always talking about the power of game-changing trust and how trust really underpins everything in creating a high-performance team and therefore a high-performance business. So as leaders, we really need to show up predictably and be consistent. And that means walking the talk and doing what we say we're going to do. Because when we're consistent and we're always acting in the same manner, that gives our team members that sense of psychological safety that is so, so important. And I think in the kind of crazy mad world that we live in nowadays, where there is so much change, the consistency that we can show as individuals helps our team members have some sense of certainty because they can be pretty certain about how we are going to show up, even though the environment around us might be very, very uncertain. And we know just from all the statistics around the increased number of mental health challenges that people have, that this uncertainty that exists in the world breeds anxiety, second guessing, and disengagement. But when we are consistent, we create a rhythm. We give people a sense of reliability and they know what to expect. And that enables them to relax into their roles and bring their best self to work. So consistency effectively aligns our behaviors with our values. And we've talked a lot on previous editions of the podcast about the importance of values and how values actually steer where your business is going. And they're kind of that guiding star, right? That makes us and reveals to us the best way to respond in a situation. So if we always live by our values, we're always going to be consistent. People always know what we stand for. And so that gives people that sense of security. I think consistency can also help create momentum because if we consistently do something each and every day, it can add up to big results. So this is the concept of Kaizen. This 1% shift, maybe each and every day or each and every week, in itself seems pretty insignificant, but it compounds over time. And that's the power of the compound effect. And I believe we live in a world where we are so much driven by instant gratification that we forget the power of one small action. And at the moment, I'm on a little bit of a weight release journey. I've noticed that over the last couple of years, I have actually really piled on the pounds. And it's interesting because, I keep going, one extra chocolate bar today won't matter. But what I've seen as a result of that over the last 2 years is I've put on nearly 10 kgs of weight, which is pretty horrific, actually. So, that's how one small action, in this case, a negative action, has had a compound effect that's not been effective. So what would be the effect of not having a chocolate bar every single day, for the next 6 to 9 months? That's going to have a massive impact, not only on my weight, but my health and well-being as well. So the other thing about consistency is it improves accountability because our team members are really clear on what's going on and people know where they stand. And I think people like nothing more than to know where they stand in the workplace and in life in terms of what's going on. And then this consistency sets a tone for the culture because people always know that you're going to do what you say you're going to do. So one way we can think about this consistency is it's like compounding the interest of leadership. And as I said, it doesn't always, or rarely actually, produces dramatic short-term gains, but over time, absolutely everything changes. And what I've really observed with the horses in particular is that when people come and partner with them on our Unbridled Leadership retreats, the leaders who are consistent in their energy, their presence, and their directions are the ones that the horses naturally want to follow. They're looking for calm, steady leadership that fosters trust. And they don't respond well to erratic energy and people being really emotional because that causes tension for them. So this importance of learning the power of consistency in business and in life, I think is really important. And I like this quote actually from Marie Forleo, which is success doesn't come from what you do occasionally, it comes from what you do consistently. And James Clear, who's written an amazing book called Atomic Habits, and if you haven't read it, I'd clearly suggest that you do. Really helpful about how to install new habits. And he says, you become what you consistently do. And, how true is that? You become what you consistently do. And I think all of us as leaders, we want to become the best version of ourselves. So we always have to show up being the best version of ourselves so that we become that. And from a team engagement point of view, 70% of team members said that their sense of engagement was heavily influenced by consistent and open communication from leadership. And that's a statistic from Gallup. And inconsistent feedback is often one of the top 3 reasons why team members become disengaged or leave. So a lot of really, really positive benefits in the workplace for us being consistent in our actions. So consistency, one pillar, something that we need to strive to achieve. And I guess my next challenge is going to be how to be consistent and continue with the podcast for the next year. As I said, it's easy because it's something I love to do. So it's not been a chore to do it, but staying consistent. I know, for example, for me on social media or sending a newsletter to my email list, I've been very, very inconsistent at that. And I'm really beginning to notice the power that consistency has. I knew it, but sometimes you've got to see these things to believe it. So I'm very grateful and thankful that you've allowed me to be consistent and deliver and share this podcast with you each and every week. As I said, I am super excited that we have got here today to the 52nd episode of Impactful Teamwork. So it is our birthday. And I just wanted to talk a bit about celebration because I'm really celebrating because I am beyond proud, as I've said, of where we've got to. But it's interesting. I see very few leaders really embracing celebration in the workplace. And every time groups come out and work with the horses on our unbridled leadership retreats, it's the thing I always have to call them out on. You know, in some of the exercises, one of the team members will lead a horse around the course. And when they get back, the team do a debrief and they never celebrate what the person has achieved. And I'm always making them clap and cheer and celebrate what somebody has achieved. And why is celebration so important? Well, it reinforces positive behaviors. Behaviors we want to see more of, such as collaboration, innovation, resilience, and initiative. Because when we celebrate what's working, people naturally gravitate towards repeating those actions. As a result of that, it boosts morale and motivation, because recognition can re-energize a really tired team, and it gives us a sense of progress and accomplishment, especially on long or difficult projects. So, you know, I'd really encourage you to celebrate milestones on the way as we're accomplishing different things in business. This connection and celebration also helps build connection and bonding. And we know that relationships are so key in business. So when we celebrate together, we strengthen the relationships and the psychological safety that exists between team members that's so foundational for everything we do. It also encourages a growth mindset, because when we celebrate effort and learning, not just the outcomes, we tend to build a culture that's more resilient and open to feedback and innovation. And I think this is really important, that we do need to celebrate the effort and the learning, not just the outcomes, because oftentimes in business, we might not quite get the outcomes that we had wanted, but we've seen amazing effort and contribution from people on the way. So we really must acknowledge that. And because that's what's going to keep people engaged, because we might not always make the outcome that we had headed for, particularly in the very volatile, changing world where we live in, where our outcomes are actually shifting quite quickly. Remember, we did an episode on reinvention, and we were talking about the adaptive framework. And actually, sometimes, you know, point B isn't just a very linear Pacific point that we want to get to, but more it's a field of opportunity that we want to get to. And it also enhances retention, because people ultimately want to feel valued. They want to feel recognized. So what we found is that teams that celebrate success and effort tend to have higher levels of engagement and lower levels of turnover. So I think it's really important just to talk a little bit about the science of celebration, because there is a neuroscience to why celebration is important. So let's have a little look at what's happening in our brains when we celebrate, because there's some very specific biology actually going on. Because when we celebrate, our brain releases a cocktail of feel-good chemicals, especially dopamine. And dopamine is often called the motivation molecule. It's the neurotransmitter that helps us feel pleasure, satisfaction, and a sense of achievement. And this is what's really, really fascinating, is that dopamine doesn't just make us feel good after we succeed. It actually plays a huge role in motivating us to keep going. So think of this. When we acknowledge a win, whether it's a shout out in a meeting, a personal thank you, or even just a moment of shared joy, our brains light up and we get a hit of dopamine, and it sends a very powerful message to our brain that was good, let's do it again. And so over time, celebration helps rewire the brain for progress. And we begin to associate effort and teamwork with positive outcomes. And that's really incredibly powerful for building resilience, momentum, and motivation in team settings. And it's not just dopamine that's activated. Celebration also releases oxytocin, the connection hormone, which deepens trust and strengthens relationships. And that's why team-based celebrations are so impactful, because they bond people together, reduce stress, and increase our sense of belonging. And there's even research showing that people who feel recognized are more open to feedback, more innovative, and more engaged. And so celebration literally primes the brain to perform better. So when leaders say to me, Julia, we don't have time to celebrate, we've got too much to do, I always challenge that, like I do on the Unbridled Leadership Retreat days. Because actually celebration is not a detour from productivity. It's actually the fuel for it. So just think about that. Celebration fuels productivity because it creates these emotional highs, which we're wired to remember, and it builds psychological safety. And so it reinforces the exact behaviors you want to see more of. So we could just summarize that and say, celebration isn't just culture building, it's actually brain building as well. So let's just reflect on a few ways to celebrate effectively, because this is really important as well. We must tailor the celebration to the individual or the team. Because some people might not like public praise, some might just prefer a handwritten note or a quiet thank you. And I recall a story that one of my mentors shared with me when they were the head of an IT software company and they had brought in a new salesperson. And quarter 1, this new salesperson smashed all of their targets, did incredibly well. And so as a reward and a thank you, the company purchased him a case of champagne. Roll on quarter 2. This person was again the top salesperson in the company. And again, the company rewarded him with a case of champagne. Roll on quarter 3, no big surprise. He was the top salesperson again. And he was given his case of champagne, and his response was he gave them his letter of resignation. So the company stood there stunned at what had just happened. But if they just paid a little bit of attention and learnt more about this person and what they valued and what was an appropriate reward for them, they would have realized that this particular gentleman had an aversion to drinking. He didn't approve of it. So giving him a reward of a case of champagne was not the right personal reward for him. And actually what it did was it caused him to quit the company. So really important that when we celebrate, we need to do it effectively. So we need to make it personal and relevant to the person that we're dealing with. It needs to be timely. We need to celebrate as close as possible to the achievement. So don't wait until a quarterly meeting, or worse still, an end of year awards ceremony to acknowledge the win in the moment. Let's celebrate in the moment what is happening for people. Very, very powerful. Because then we can link that to the goals of the business and we can make it meaningful for the person. So, let's take an example of this. If one of our values is innovation, we could say something like, you demonstrated our value of curiosity and innovation by finding that new client solution. That was brilliant. So let's tie the celebrations to the behaviors that we want people to do in the business. And I've said earlier, celebrate milestones along the way. We want to acknowledge the small things as well as the big accomplishments. When we go back to that concept of Kaizen we were talking about earlier on as regards consistency, we can apply the Kaizen concept to celebration. A number of small celebrations along the way are going to compound and make the end result much more powerful for people. And don't always celebrate the same way. So this is partly related to make it personal, because we could have some drinks after work or some sort of party, but it could just be a celebration, could be just acknowledging and shouting at somebody at a team meeting. We could actually have in the office a wall of wins, top employee of the month, for example, something like that. or a celebration slideshow of recent successes. You might want to think about a peer recognition system. I'm in a coaching and mentoring group at the moment, and we have that every month. All of us vote on who do we think has made the most contribution and been the most supportive of each other within the coaching group. Very, very powerful peer recognition system. It could just be a random act of appreciation. People really value the spontaneous thanks that they get. That could be, you bring them in a special coffee from, Starbucks or Costa or whatever your favorite coffee house is. Or it could just be something as simple as a handwritten note. And in fact, some of you know that unfortunately, my lead coach, Coach Toby, he had to be put down recently. And I got a really, really lovely handwritten note from my vet related to that. And it was really, really touching. So that was a really amazing random act of appreciation. You can see now it even makes me tear up when I think about it. And I think it's really important as well to remember that some people within our team are better at acknowledging their wins and their celebrations than others. So it's really important that for us as a leader of a team to make sure that we acknowledge everyone's contribution. And I say this because it's a topic that's coming up a lot with a lot of my coaching clients right now, where they're struggling to get promotions because they're just not naturally as vocal about what they have achieved and aren't celebrating what they've achieved in the workplace as much as their colleagues, and so are getting overlooked. So really important that as leaders, we make sure that all of our team members are getting the airtime and getting celebrated in the right way, of course, if that's appropriate. So celebration, as I said, often overlooked in the busyness of everyday life, but there is so much power in celebrating within the workplace. And I'd encourage you to actually view celebration as a strategic lever of high performance teams that we can use to maintain momentum and build morale and strengthen trust. Because when team members feel seen and appreciated, they're far more likely to stay engaged and go the extra mile and keep showing up as their best. Just think about this. Imagine a team that's pulled off a really difficult project. They worked late, they overcame obstacles, and they collaborated beautifully. But when the deadline passed, it was straight on to the next task. How many of you can relate to that? There's no acknowledgement, there's no pause, it's just another line checked off. And over time, that becomes exhausting. And the invisible effort leads to disengagement. And you remember at Christmas, we were talking about the power of the pause. So important to pause and celebrate at the end of each, big project that we've pulled off. And now flip that thought. Same project, same team. But this time, when the work is done, the leader gathers everyone together for a quick huddle. They call out specific wins, share appreciation, and maybe even send a note to the wider business recognizing the achievement. That simple act tells everyone in the team, you matter, your work matters, and we noticed. And that's what celebration is really about. It's about making the invisible visible. Celebration creates an emotional high, and neuroscience tells us when we anchor the experience with emotion, especially positive ones, it will stick. It literally wires the brain to want to do more of that behavior again. And, I certainly know in the work with the horses how recognition, when we're working with the horses, how they really value it. They value that celebration. They respond to our subtle energy shifts, and they know when they've done something right, and they know when they haven't. And actually my horses are super tuned into that. It's very, very interesting. If I go out into the field, for example, and one of the horses has got itself into trouble, maybe put its foot through a piece of electric wire or something, it's done something that's not safe. I know that when I raise my voice and say, stop, they respond to that energy and they immediately stop, and I'm able to resolve a problem. They don't go into a big panic. And, that's a way that I'm able to use my energy with them to prevent any bad things happening. But, that raising our energy, raising our vibe in the business helps people encourage that celebration. So questions for you this week are, where could you pause and celebrate? What progress have you or your team made that deserves acknowledgement? And how can you make the invisible visible? Because when we celebrate well, we don't just build better teams, we build better cultures. And as Tom Peters says, celebrate what you want to see more of. Because acknowledging the good that you already have in your life is the foundation for all abundance. Or as Dale Carnegie said, people work for money, but they go the extra mile for recognition, praise, and rewards. So just remember, what gets recognized and celebrated gets repeated. So if you want to have a high performance team, I really encourage you to incorporate some celebration in there and do that consistently so that you can help harness a high performing team. I hope you have an amazing week, and I'm going to go off and celebrate now. I think I'm going to go out and spend some time with the horses as my celebration, and I look forward to speaking to you again next week. Okay, have a great time. Bye-bye.